NextGen Economy Podcast, accelerating breakthroughs.
This podcast is brought to you by ExO Economy, transforming the world economy for a better future.
This podcast is brought to you by Futureville, imagining and building places worth living for.
This is Angela Faye from Futureville, where we are imagining and building places worth living for. What if we could overcome paralysis? That is a really big, hairy, audacious goal. According to dictionary.com, paralysis is the loss of ability to move or sometimes feel anything in part of the body as a result of illness, poison, or injury. But it's also an inability to act or function in a person, organization, or place. So today, we're actually talking about overcoming paralysis in both of those realms. As we talk about paralysis, really, who cares? Who are the people experiencing the lack of mobility? Are they family? Are they friends? Are they caregivers? Are they purpose-driven entrepreneurs and risk takers who are embroiled in focusing on physical paralysis? Lots of people, in particular public health providers, need to care more. The data shows that the lifetime cost of serving someone with paralysis through traditional healthcare means is between 1 and 3.5 million, depending on the stage of life or the type of injury or paralysis that they're experiencing. And of course, insurance providers, again, looking at those numbers, they just don't make sense. So we're going to talk today about 3 inarguable cases for fast-tracking the adoption of new technologies that augment human performance, and fast. These are 3 ways that we can transform the world of paralysis to a better future. Joining me today, and who better to have this conversation, is Kieran Macleod. And I just want to introduce Kieran, the NextGen entrepreneur, and tell us a little bit about why you're here with us, Kieran, today. What's your story?
Touching back to what you said, the definition of paralysis, everyone's paralyzed in some way or another, in some part of their life. Maybe some trauma they can't get past, or a physical injury, or some psychological barrier they've built for themselves over time. But I have a physical paralysis encountered over the last 2.5 years after a motorcycle accident in Thailand while I was traveling with a business partner trying to incubate a tech startup in the crypto blockchain space.
And how has that impacted your life? And I just want to talk a little bit about day to day. What sort of impact is not being able to move from the waist down impacted your personal productivity and quality of life?
I'm a bit higher than the waist down. It's more like nipples down for what I've got. So I don't have control over most of my abs as well, which adds an extra layer of difficulty. But yeah, it's everything from not being able to move to muscle spasms and nerve pain. I guess there's some body dysmorphia too, because you see your body shrink in some ways as the muscles atrophy, and then your stomach looks really weird in comparison to me having a rather athletic body before. So you're going in both ways at the same time. So that can be very strange. And then you're also witnessing weird stuff with your feet as they don't get as much walking attention as they're used to. But yeah, it impacts your daily life in so many ways. Pain is interesting and tricky. It seems to come and go in waves like so many other things. But even just this last week, I thought I had dealt with a lot of pain in a really good way. And then you fall or slip and something happens. And now there's like a new type of pain that you don't remember experiencing for a very long time that comes out of nowhere.
This is a bit of a vulnerable point, I know, but I found you and discovered you when I was trying to get some solutions in business with liquid capital. And the reality is the impact of physical paralysis has also impacted friendships and your business, and over the last 2 years. Do you want to just highlight a little bit of that?
Yeah, for friends, I guess you see who your real friends are in some ways. And some ways not. A lot of people are going through their own stuff, and then obviously coronavirus happened. A lot of people got hit in other ways for that, but some friends disappear and stop engaging, and some friendships become much stronger. And yeah, I've had a much larger impact on my life over the last couple of years. Before then, I hoped I was at least fairly independent, and now I hope I'm still fairly independent, but my friends have definitely come to help in some ways more than others.
Now, when I met you, I remember asking you the question: if you had $1 million and could wave a magic wand, what would you want for yourself?
It would probably be an exosuit. Those can go anywhere from 50 to 250,000, depending on which one and which model.
And what would that exosuit or exoskeleton mean for you? What's the actual personal impact of what? And I understand that when you first get it, there's always going to be that hard figuring it all out for your personal case. But then what sort of life on a personal level would that create for you?
It is pretty tricky to get around now, depending on where you live with level of paralysis I have. It's definitely worse with higher level, but right now still going more than a couple blocks or even within the building can be tricky depending on like minor injuries that you get in your wrists or your elbows or your shoulders or skin injuries. So having an exosuit would basically make it so that you could walk at least probably a couple hours a day, most days, unassisted eventually after a couple weeks of assistance, and get even more independence. It would also just be really good for the body and the mind in so many ways, because I've only walked for a total of maybe 2 hours or 3 hours in the last 2.5 years. So if you compare that to most people's day, you probably get that in a single day.
Wow.
With an exosuit, you'd be able to get that the first day of having it almost.
So to me, it is an inarguable case that the case for an exoskeleton or suit or even augmented wheelchairs that are totally different performance are 10 times more impactful from a human experience than the options are for you now.
Yes, waking up and knowing you have to get right into a wheelchair and operate most of your life in a wheelchair, even though it's only been 2.5 years to me. I imagine if you're born with an injury, have it earlier on in life, it becomes easier over time, but it's still, regardless of how adapted you are to it, it still feels weird and feels unnatural in a lot of ways, which is physically obvious for everyone outside.
So I think we've talked about and proven the case as far as I'm concerned. It's inarguable that we just need to get an exoskeleton. And I want to talk a little bit, though, about the business case and the sense of scale that we're talking about, because you and I have talked about this, and I just remember thinking, surely I can help you get an exoskeleton. That was really one of my first goals. And then we thought, oh, how many people are we really talking about? What is the scope of this problem? Everyone in the world. And you and I dug in and did some research, and picking up on our quintessential Superman, Christopher Reeves, their foundation was just one of the sources, and we've cited many, that just gives us some of the scope and scale of what we're talking about. And in the US alone, there were 5.4 million people suffering from injury paralysis. And this is not including any of the other mobility challenges like elder care or MS or some of the other conditions. And I think it was you that brought to my attention the lifetime cost of our public healthcare system.
It's definitely not just me that needs an exosuit. Most people with paralysis need some type of device similar to this in order to regain a lot of their life back. I think in the US, it's up to about 2% of the population that have paralysis, usually from some form of stroke or motor vehicle accident, along with, like you mentioned, MS. ALS is also a big reason for loss of bodily function and movement. There's a lot of reasons someone might need an exosuit. I was also reading from the WHO that worldwide it's anywhere from 40 to 60 people per million that are dealing with some form of paralysis. So depending on where you're in the world, it does cost different amounts,
Right.
But it's anywhere from about, $1 million to $3 million in most developed countries. for a cost on the healthcare system. So it depends on where you're getting your assistance and the degree to which it's helpful, but also it depends on, are they including just high cost pharmaceuticals and low quality physiotherapy?
We haven't even attempted to put a dollar figure or a scope on the lost productivity as far as you as a person or the millions of people suffering from the same condition. They would love to be contributing more in business or to their community or volunteering or to their families.
Yeah, it's all of their lost wages. For I think it's maybe 35% of people with paralysis can no longer work to any capacity, which is quite impactful. It's good now that a lot of jobs can be done from your computer, but there's also so many problems that can stop you from being able to do that, and other time commitments or restraints that it costs to just keep up with life.
So let's just take that individual case just so we can follow that story a little bit. So we're talking between $1 and $3.5 million to service a single individual in comparison to, for instance, getting Kieran an exoskeleton suit. Could you give me an idea of what you understand to be the upfront capital costs and then the ongoing costs if you were now suddenly found yourself less in the public care system and more autonomous with a suit? What would that look like?
Yeah. So there's being in a suit and the benefits that would cost your life. You would prevent a lot of muscle atrophy. There's a large connection between muscle density and atrophy and cognitive disorders later in life. So having as much muscle on your body is really good for that. When you're paralyzed, you already have a 2 to 5 times chance of mortality to the average person. So trying to keep up those things as much as possible is good. Osteoporosis, and having all of these things not go wrong, the way they save money on the healthcare system in the long term is not needing to get yearly MRIs and x-rays and tens of thousands of dollars worth of pain pills per year, along with maybe 5 to 10 hours of physiotherapy a week per month. Or per year, depending on how good you've got it set up. And yeah, the ability to just take back a lot of independence in your life. If you can walk alone at home, unassisted, in a healthy way, to where it may have cost you $500 or $600 to travel to somewhere to do once a week is night and day.
I hadn't even thought of factored in like the travel costs and things like that. But we're talking about the difference between an upfront capital cost of $100,000 and $250,000, and then ongoing maintenance of the suit itself, something like $2,500 a year.
Most of the costs are going to be upfront, and then you would need anywhere from like maybe 10 to 50 sessions with a physiotherapist in order to learn how to use the suit. You're basically learning how to walk again, like a child does. So you have to start with 3 to 4 people helping you and you using a walker, to eventually one person and you using a walker. And then eventually you have like just 1 or 2 people helping you, and then you get down to just using it alone. But it's a very tricky thing to learn.
So again, Kieran, I'm just going to say, to me, you've just nailed the business sense, and from both an individual perspective and the whole entire public healthcare system, that it just makes more sense to have a higher upfront capital cost than just all of these wasted costs. And we've already talked about the human sense. I want to talk a little bit about the sense for the whole community. And I want to get a sense from your perspective on, again, if you could go big and your challenges, even with an exosuit, but certainly in this phase of now until you are independently mobile with an exosuit, essentially we are talking about augmenting your human performance in comparison to what it is now. But what would an ideal community look like for you? Some of the frustrations that I see, and not even directly experiencing paralysis, just in the built environment, curbs and bathrooms that are quote unquote accessible, and all of this major infrastructure has these codes about building for access. And yet really it's a marginal increase. I would assume it's probably better, but it's not great. Tell me about some of the challenges that you're experiencing in the built environment that you live in now. And if you could imagine the perfect base? What would it?
That's a good question. And I did have one last idea for that cost, just that spread from your idea if it only costs you marginally more for infrastructure. It is almost the same for an exosuit. If you get injured in a developed country, you're already costing your medical system on the emergency side anywhere from $70,000 to $250,000 just for the ICU, for the surgery, the implants you have to get, the doctors, the anesthesiologists, and weeks and months of in-hospital care and then post-rehab treatment. You've already spent $250,000. So adding on a device that would be $50,000, you're only adding anywhere from 10 to 200% more. It depends on what the total cost ends up being and your level of injury. If your spinal cord injury is not complete and much less severe, then it takes much less time. If you can't use your arms, it goes even more. But how that would change in a society or in a group or a community, there's so many ways. When you think about the basic things that a human needs, a community is one of those. A lot of us are very separate and isolated. Wheelchair people are not, especially during COVID. As humans, used to having anywhere from 50 to 100 close social family or friend members or community members that we engage with on a weekly or daily basis for collecting food or resources and maintaining homeostasis for all of the chemicals that run through our body. And we have very little of that now. A lot of us live in apartments or houses separated from most of the people we engage with. This doesn't even touch on the physical stuff, but the way you would build a physical community fully accessible for people that need it would drastically change all of their lives. I've only been in a slightly wheelchair accessible apartment now for the last month. And for the last year, I had lived somewhere where it was almost dangerous to leave the house due to how steep the ramp was and how it just went right into a tree. And then even leaving the house was almost impossible because it was a ramp upwards that was way too steep for me to go up unless someone else pushed me. A flat apartment style or townhouse style community where people could grow some of their own food, engage with other people, work together on small projects or big projects, and in general STEM, engineering, science, engaging community would be pretty awesome for a lot of people.
You've always been forward thinking. You also had built a tiny house. And this just gives us a snapshot on what you were imagining your future would look like. It was out of the major urban center. What were you imagining would be your lifestyle?
In high school, I started hearing about small houses and also just being environmentally neutral, growing a lot of your own food, being portable, and having a low environmental impact. And then also financially, I was spending anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a month for rent with myself and a partner to live. And it seemed just obvious if you could build a house for what would cost maybe 2 or 3 years of rent that you could live in for 20 or 30 years. It made so much sense. And then I was also getting along with other people in the tiny house community. Seemed like a good idea. And it almost had a dual purpose. It was parked on a vegan animal rescue farm, but it was also designed in a way that it could be used in a downtown setting and mesh in to look like a shed, but still be solar powered and independent and not need an external bathroom or shower to use.
I'm going to tie all of this conversation into actionable ways that people can help enable augmented human performance. You've heard the human case, which is first and foremost really the transformation that we'd like to see both for you, Kieran, and for millions of other people. The second, of course, is the business case. It doesn't make any sense to be serving people with paralysis in traditional means. We really want to engage with the new technologies and bring them to life for more people. And what just makes community sense to our audience of listeners, we are going to talk about 3 absolutely imaginable ways that you can help out right now and contribute. First of all, the big, bold future. Number 1, that build a purpose-built prototype village that will enable Kieran to live in the community that he talks about, and people where they can live as permanent residents, or they can, go to the village and actually go through the transformation of learning how to walk again. There's going to be companies there with different solutions. There's going to be a production space. going to be a workspace where Kieren can actually, do his consulting and work on the side, and a place for individuals and families alike to be there. That is our big, hairy, audacious goal. Kieren, what are your comments about a purpose-built village that helps augment human performance?
As someone that wants to build a community like this, someone that's got resources to bring to the table, along with other things, exosuits. And I see this coming together in so many ways, whether it's in like a downtown city type environment or more out in the farm area. You could have an apartment building based one or something that's a bit more open on a large piece of land, which might be an easier way to start. But yeah, being able to move around in an easy way where it's hopefully relatively flat, or there's convenient elevators or ways to get up and down if you need to, growing your own food, engaging with community members, being able to work together and build stuff. What gives people purpose is passion and drive for something in the future. And a lot of people with paralysis or similar injuries get isolated and can be very limiting. So trying to bring a bunch of these people together that want to build and grow seems like a good idea.
I love it. And serve millions of people who, if we can catch them when they've experienced paralysis early, the chances of being able to retrain their brain to be able to walk even unassisted is much higher if we have a community like this dedicated.
Definitely. Yeah, the rehab center I went to didn't even have an exosuit available. So if you had a minor injury, your chances of recovery would go up quite drastically if you had a good exosuit available. And obviously a much less severe injury. I've got one of the highest severities of damage to a spinal cord.
So just as a recap, building a purpose-built village is our agenda. That's what FutureBuild does. We help shape and project manage the capital raising, the getting from idea to implementation. So if anybody is inclined, whether you are a philanthropist on the human cause, or you're a company who sees the business case for introducing this, or purely a host community that wants to be on the world map for augmenting human performance and being like the birthplace of a community like this, we'd love to hear from you. So alive@futureville.com is a great way to connect with us on that. But I also want to talk about that roadshow. And another major hurdle for Kieren is testing different exoskeletons. Right now, there's a whole lot of red tape as far as healthcare approvals. So even just helping people imagine a different future and actually taking the steps to test different products is a barrier right now. Kieren, being the stimulus for this idea, tell us a little bit about the roadshow, what you would love to help bring to a much larger community of people.
I imagine most people with paralysis, first of all, and most of them may not even know about them, that they exist or how it would change their life. So the idea was to bring a variety of potential exosuits out to where people are. It's great when they're all clustered in a big city, but sometimes they're in smaller cities too. And basically allowing them to try one of these exosuits and petition for themselves to even get their insurance to come in and help with it, or find methods to the community to find one for themselves. Seems like a good community effort overall. We can bring down the cost from millions of dollars per person.
The call to action here is, let's take these technologies on the road. We want to hear from manufacturers, potential distributors, which might be healthcare providers, or even just champions like Kieren, who would be interested in bringing these skeletons to their community, getting past the red tape and making it happen in their community. We want to hear from you. What pathways do you see and have you created for yourself to get one step closer to getting your own personal ExOSkeleton?
I've tried to continue with the company that I was running at the time of the injury in order to self-fund one, and that remained difficult, trying to engage with friends and family to raise enough money to get some, and then also just continuing to work in other ways that I've used in the past, so advising or consulting, and it remains difficult. The monthly costs of paralysis seem to always eat up whatever money I can potentially save, and equipment For catheters, you've got to buy mobility accessories like wheelchairs and keep them repaired. If you want to take anything for pain like CBD, that costs a lot. So yeah, getting an exosuit is pretty pricey, and then being able to maintain it and care for it properly and ensure it, it's like a whole other thing.
But you do have at least one big fundraising initiative on the go. By necessity, you've had to let go of your tiny house right now. So is it for sale?
Yeah, I'm definitely trying to sell it. It's on YouTube if you search my name and tiny house, or if you want to email me and connect and learn about the specifics of it. It's located near Toronto, Ontario. So anyone in North America, I guess, could really get to it if they wanted to. It's basically a self-contained house, and it's about 95% complete. It needs a little bit of completion, but it's 99 square feet. It's got a wet room and a kitchen and an elevator bed. And it took a long time to design.
I would love to see you find a buyer for this tiny house, which is going to put a big chunk of money aside for you to save up for, and maybe perhaps a down payment. Let's talk about all the pathways to possibility in getting you this exoskeleton. Maybe it would be enough of a down payment for somebody to finance the remainder of it. Or send us some of the vendors that we're going to be showcasing on the road show. We imagine you're the perfect test pilot, and we need other champions like you to be able to take on the road and showcase the amazing experience in exoskeleton in life versus without one. These are just a few of the ways that we imagine, and we've opened up to the possibility of getting Kieran an exoskeleton, and then scaling this same experience for millions of other people. We would love to have you contribute. We'll put all of the calls to action at the end of this podcast so you can contribute. Kieran, if you could leave our audience with some inspiring thoughts, what would you like to say?
That's a good question. Life is very difficult for all kinds of people all over the world. Obviously, with the type of injury I have, it makes life more difficult compared to how I was progressing before and where I may have been now without it. But for so many other people in the world, it's done enough and added enough difficulty to their life that they're not even to the point where they may be able to sit here for an hour and record a podcast like this from having too much pain or trauma or PTSD. And a lot of that goes undealt with. It's pretty hard to speak out about it and talk about what's going wrong in your life. Most people get negative feedback from the people around them, unfortunately, even if they're family or friends. So it's hard to talk about. And if more people talk about it, it'll normalize it a bit more and make it more comfortable.
I want to acknowledge your bravery today. I do not want to underestimate the effort and your contribution to making this happen. And we are one step closer to enabling augmented human performance for millions of people around the world. It always starts with one big, bold step. Kieran, you're an inspiration. I want to thank you for joining us on the podcast today. And I look forward to seeing all of our calls to action gain some momentum and for you to achieve your goals.
Awesome. Yeah, it was great talking to you. And if anyone wants to get in contact with me, I have an email that is emailkieran@pm.me. emailkieran@pm.me.
Awesome. Kieran, thanks so much. We'll see you again soon.